The Surprising Adventures of Baron Munchausen with Willy Rushton and Toby Longworth. Episode 6, By Wind to Madame Luna.
Baron Munchausen? Wasn't he some sort of 18th century eccentric? Told whopping great fibs, didn't he? Not exactly relevant to this day and age, surely. Such are the typical remarks of ordinary laymen, unlettered and confused, to whom I happen to reveal, while quaffing wine in a social context, that I am the world's foremost expert in the field of Munchausen's studies. How pathetically misguided this view of the Baron is. Eccentric? Possible, but none the worse for that. Fibs? I have managed to confirm the truth of most of his accounts. As for relevance, why, this man was years in advance of his time, even in the matter of those unavoidable holiday accidents.
I may have given the impression that my life is nothing but battles, wars, and strife. Nothing could be further from the truth. Like anyone else, I like to relax now and then. Yet even when I'm not looking for it, adventure is never far away. Shortly after my return from the New World, I was visiting some friends who lived near Marseille in France. One hot afternoon, I was tempted to bathe in the ocean, and since no one else was in sight, I stripped off all my clothes and waded in. This, as it turned out, was a bad idea. An extremely large fish was lurking in the waters, and was soon advancing towards me at great speed with its jaws wide open. Thinking quickly,
At last year's Munchausen, Truth or Fantasy, conference at The Hague, there was a lively discussion as to the nature of this fish. A shark, scoffed Dr. Myron C. Bogle of Wisconsin University, in the Mediterranean. I was able to point out that a large sea bass could well have...
Thinking quickly, I curled myself into a ball in order to avoid the fish's teeth as I disappeared down its throat. Living in a fish's stomach is not nearly as uncomfortable as you might imagine. It's dark, of course, and rather damp, but it's also surprisingly warm. On the other hand, since I had much to do in the outside world and there's no future in a fish's stomach, I quickly worked out a plan of escape. There was plenty of room, so I decided to make as much commotion as possible in the hope that it would decide to get rid of me. First, I did a succession of head springs and backflips. Then I ran from one length of the stomach to the other, bouncing off its soft walls. Finally, I danced a Scottish hornpipe while singing on the bonny, bonny banks of Loch Lomond at the top of my voice. Oh, you take the high road, and I'll take the low road, and I'll be in Scotland of I. And it worked. The fish gave a great roar of pain and anger, stood straight up in the water, and waved its head about in a desperate attempt to stop the Scottish noises coming from inside it. Within a matter of minutes, it had been harpooned by an Italian fishing boat that was passing by. The fish and I were hauled on deck. It was then that I realized my troubles were not yet over. From inside the stomach, I heard the Italian fisherman discussing how best to cut the fish up.
The Baron, of course, was a fluent speaker of no fewer than 17 languages, including Chinese, Swahili, and Icelandic.
I was now in danger of being stabbed to death. Remembering that it's the custom of Italian fishermen to start cutting open a fish at each end and work towards the centre, I stood in the very middle of its stomach, making myself as small as was humanly possible. As the first knife entered the fish not far from where I was standing, I shouted loudly at the top of my voice, Attenzione, pescatores! Io sono il Baron Munchausen!
Attention, fishermen, I am Baron Munchausen.
As you will know, it's most unusual for an Italian to be lost for words. But as an entirely naked man stepped out of the belly of a fish, the fishermen were struck dumb with amazement. Buongiorno, signori.
Good day, gentlemen,
I said, with as much dignity as the circumstances allowed. Diving elegantly over the side of the boat, I swam back to the shore where I found my clothes. It was shortly after this incident that I took a fancy to the idea of a holiday in Turkey.
In Turkey, Baron? Where, a matter of months before, you had been kept in slavery? Where the Sultan had pursued you through his harem after you had thrown his cannon into the river Simois?
Well, I was never one to hold a grudge. Anyway, one day, while boating on the river Marmora, which flows through Istanbul, I noticed a rather odd-looking object floating over my head. Although it was no more than a dot in the distance, I took a shot at it with a gun I had with me, and brought it down. Good Lord. Imagine my surprise when I discovered I'd shot a hot air balloon, which had now fallen into the river near my boat. As I drew closer to it, I could see that the balloon had been carrying a man and what appeared to be a partly roasted sheep. I apologized profusely to the balloonist as I took him on board my boat. He surprised and startled me by bursting into tears and thanking me profusely.
I am a French scientist,
he gasped.
I have been floating in this accursed balloon for 7 or 8 days.
I asked the Frenchman how he had survived. The story he told me was one of the strangest I have ever heard. He had intended his journey in the balloon to take no more than 3 hours, as part of an experiment. But with typically French inefficiency, he neglected to take into account changes in the direction of the wind. But what of this dead sheep, I asked. Was that part of the experiment?
He was not always dead, but...
The Frenchman told me he had taken the sheep up in the balloon to test the effect of the atmosphere upon a live animal. But the wind changed, and after 3 days without food, he was so desperate for food that he was obliged to kill the animal for its meat. By this time he was 2 miles beyond the moon, and was so close to the sun that his eyebrows were still scorched.
You see my eyebrows?
Amazing! So, using logic and good sense in what would surprise many who know the French as I do, the man hung the sheep over the edge of the balloon on the side that the sun was hottest. Within 2 hours, he said, it was roasted perfectly. He'd been living off the meat ever since.
If it had not been for you, kind sir, I would have been floating in space eating mutton for weeks. You would like a taste?
You know, monsieur, your story reminds me very much of the time when I was sailing the South Seas when a sudden wind got up. I pointed the boat back to shore, and as we went, I told him all about the astonishing story of my journey to the moon.
Ah, yes, the Sultan's Silver Hatchet. A wonderful adventure.
This wind was so great that... What did you just say?
I was recollecting the pleasure with which I heard of your journey to the moon, the beanstalk, the Sultan's favourite bee.
My second journey, you fool! Does nobody pay attention to me these days? It all started when I was sailing the South Seas in search of Brobdingnag, the mysterious country of giants which is mentioned in Gulliver's Travels. We'd been travelling several weeks without incident, apart from spotting a group of flying men and women dancing a minuet in midair, when suddenly we were caught by a terrible hurricane. It lifted our ship clean out of the water. We were carried higher and higher until, to our astonishment, we found we were actually sailing above the clouds. At last we saw in the distance ahead of us a bright, shining silver island. We drew closer and docked our ship, which had now been considerably battered by the wind.
Goodness me,
I said as we came ashore.
I know this place terribly well.
The ship's captain, a foolish skeptic who for some reason had taken to doubting my every word, turned to me with a sneer.
Oh, yes, Baron. And where might we be, then?
We are upon the surface of the moon. If you care to look back in the direction from which we've come, you will see a distant planet with seas, mountains, and trees.
The captain looked where I was pointing and gasped with amazement.
Why, it's Earth. You're right, Baron. We've been blown onto the moon.
At that moment we caught sight of something most unusual. A group of strange and enormous beings flew over our heads, riding on the backs of vultures, with wings which were at least as big as the sails of our ship. It was the first of many extraordinary and wonderful sights we saw during our stay on Madame Luna, the moon. Everything we discovered is rather larger here than on Earth. A moon flea, for example, is the size of a sheep, and the moon dwellers themselves are never less than 36 feet tall. It so happened that during our stay, the king of the moon was preparing for a war with the sun. His main weapons were giant radishes, which are fired like darts through the air, arrows made out of the tips of young asparagus, and potato cannonballs. The moon soldier's main defence is a ripe mushroom used as a shield. Naturally, the king begged me to fight on his side, but after careful consideration I declined the offer. I like battles as much as the next man, but the idea of being pelted with giant potatoes as I hid behind a mushroom did not seem a dignified way for a baron to spend his time. Moon people are quite unlike humans, in that they only need to eat once a month. This they do by cooking a huge quantity of food, opening a large flap on the left side of their stomachs and placing the food inside.
It is perhaps invidious to mention the learned paper of Dr. Myron C. Bogle of Wisconsin University, published in the New Age Journal under the memorable title The Lunarian Lunacy, Was Baron Munchausen the First Science Fiction Writer? Fiction! I admit that beings who consume their comestibles once a month through a flap in the side of the stomach are not what one would expect to see every day of the week, even at Wisconsin University. But there is more in heaven and earth, Dr. Bogle, than is dreamt of.
There are no male or females among the Lunarians who grow on trees. Once a year, the large pods hanging from the different varieties of tree, the length of the pods is at least 2 yards, are collected and then laid carefully on the ground. When they've changed colour, the pods are thrown into boiling water until after a couple of hours they crack, and out jumps a moon person. The trees vary widely in shape and size. There's the doctor tree, which produces only doctors, the soldier tree, the priest tree, the farmer tree, the philosopher tree, the clown tree, and so on. This is a tremendously practical arrangement. Instead of spending many hours considering what career to follow, as we do, the moon person simply emerges from its pod and says,
"Good morning, I'm a doctor."
and that's that. In my opinion, the body of a moon person is rather better designed than our own. It has, I admit, only one finger on each hand, but that finger can bend any way it chooses, and can do everything that a human's can do. Their stomachs, in addition to taking in food on a monthly basis in the way I've described, have another extremely practical use. They can be used as carrier sacks when required. The moon person merely opens the side flap, places the object inside, and then retrieves it when needed. But without doubt, the most useful feature of the moon person's body is its head, which can be removed at any time. On Madame Luna, it's fashionable to carry your head around under your right arm, but then if a moon person is going on a dangerous voyage or taking part in a violent sport, it simply leaves its head at home. On the other hand, if it wants to investigate what is happening on the planet without the bother of walking or taking a vulture, the moon person can send its head on a scouting mission while the body relaxes at home. Eyes, which can also be taken out at will, are bought and sold at a local shop. If a moon person wishes to look under a table, it merely drops an eye onto the ground and lets it roll around a little. Because they're obsessed with what is fashionable, moon people are in the habit of buying new eyes once every few months. Green eyes were in vogue while I was there. The eye shops couldn't sell enough of them. There are no unpleasant smells on Madame Luna, because the inhabitants never sweat. When once I asked a moon person whether it was in the habit of taking a bath, it seemed to think I was joking.
Sit in water and scrub myself. What an exceedingly odd idea.
When they reach the end of their lives, moon people do not grow ill or die, but simply disappear one day in a puff of smoke. I saw this happen several times, and no one seemed the least put out by it. We were not the only visitors on the moon. I met travellers from Mars, Neptune, even Pluto, all of whom were quite charming. I was also introduced to a party of commercial travellers from the Dog Star, who were less pleasant. By moon standards, they were quite small, 20 foot at the most, and exceedingly ugly. Their faces were like those of bull terriers. They had no eyelids, but when they slept, they covered their eyes with their extraordinarily long tongues. Although the moon people have an intense dislike of the Doggians and find them coarse, loud, and greedy, they're much too polite to be rude to their faces. After a month or so on the moon, our ship's crew began to mutter about missing their wives, families, and simple earth comforts, such as boiled eggs. So we hired 10 giant vultures to tow our ship back into space in the direction of Earth. After 3 weeks of space travel, we splashed down in the South Seas near the island of Otterheit and resumed our search for Gulliver's Land, Brobdingnag.
But surely, Baron, that was the country found by Lemuel Gulliver in Gulliver's Travels.
So he says.
But Gulliver's Travels is a work of fiction.
Precisely. Having searched for the land of Brobdingnag for a good 2 months, I came to the conclusion that the only voyage this Gulliver fellow made was to the nearest alehouse, where he'd drink enough to stoke his latest imaginings. Unfortunately, the man must have been so tired he fell fast asleep.
Gulliver?
The French scientist. Why is it the fate of Baron Munchausen to be surrounded by people who don't listen to him? The last time my words were ignored, he went hard for the folks who chose to turn a deaf ear to me. We were in a whale at the time, and I'd called a meeting of 10,000 people.
The Surprising Adventures of Baron Munchausen featured Willy Rushton as the Baron. The editor and all other parts were played by Toby Longworth. The stories were adapted by Terence Blacker and produced by Diane Mathias.